What's up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane and asks the question, what if? I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. We're here with episode 32. And in light of some of the games that the Sixers have played out of the All-Star break and just the way the Eastern Conference is shaking out, wanted to do this is sort of like an in-between episode. We're in that lull where it's the end of the NBA, NHL season, spring training is starting. We have the NFL draft on the horizon, free agency is in a couple weeks, and then it's into full March Madness. So it's kind of that nomad's land. So definitely wanted to dive in and just take a look at the state of the Sixers, see where we are, what to expect, and just examine how we got to where we are now. It's post All-Star break, and the Sixers were relatively hot, I would say, going into the All-Star break. And then coming out, they had the first game against Memphis where they got off to the slow start, made the comeback, pretty impressive win. Then the disappointing Boston loss where they blew. They were up like 17, I think, a 17-point lead. And then the game the other night against the Heat where they just played sloppy throughout. Now, I'm recording this on the day of the home and home, the second game of that against the Heat. So they are playing the Heat tonight. So I don't necessarily think much is going to change with this in the sense that win or lose, the concerns are still the same. And standings-wise, they're third place. They're 4.5 out of first, 4, I think, out of second, if I'm not mistaken. And Milwaukee's been red hot, but Giannis is sort of banged up, and Boston is kind of in a downward spiral. So that game specifically against Boston really, really hurt in terms of the standing. And I think it's fair to say that there's some questions about the legitimacy of this team. And I talked about it the other day on This Day in Philly Sports History, where I'm questioning whether this team has what it takes to be a championship contender. And I know they're in the thick of it. A lot of people have them as dark horses, and I still think that if they're playing at their highest level and the way that they can play, nobody can beat them. The problem is they don't play that way consistently enough to be considered a legitimate threat in a 7-game series. So there's definitely been a lot of sloppy play post All-Star break. And I've seen a lot of debates back and forth on Twitter, specifically between some of the sports writers saying, oh, it's on Doc Rivers, it's on the players, it's on this. And I mean, I don't know. And granted, I do think sometimes coaches, when it comes to players' effort, they do take more of a share of the blame sometimes than what they need to. But in this case, I mean, that's 3 straight games where they had lapses in their efforts. I mean, yes, the players have to do it, but is Doc pushing the right buttons? And I'll get more into that. Doc comes with his own warts. But I do agree to a certain point that the players need to recognize that they have a golden opportunity here. And they have a good enough team when they're playing to be a threat. So I guess the issue is, how do we get here? And I mean, they came into the season do or die. And throughout sort of, I kind of look at the process era. You take away the first couple of years when Hinkie was just bringing in whoever and they were stockpiling the draft picks and Embiid was hurt and Simmons was hurt and this one sat out. But I think the Simmons rookie year, when they made the playoffs, the 17-18 season, is really where you got to start looking and seeing where maybe things could have gone a different way. And they got the 3rd seed that year, second round. That was the year they drafted Fultz. And everybody kind of talks about that. But it was Colangelo loved Fultz no matter what. So they had the 3rd pick, traded up with Boston for the 1st. Ended up with, excuse me, who ended up with Tatum, And all everybody kind of said, even Danny Ainge at the time, who I believe was the Celtics GM, said that they were dead set thinking that Tatum would have fallen to them, or they would have taken Tatum at one. So it's, did they overpay to get up? Jerry Colangelo, or Brian Colangelo, was the GM at the time. He loved Fultz. And he was the consensus number one pick by many. So you can't take hindsight out of it. Not necessarily a bad pick. As I kind of looked back through some newspapers and some articles at the time, everybody compared him to, ironically enough, James Harden, who's on our team now, and really just said that was the pick, and everybody in Philly was happy with it. And like going into the future, it was supposed to be Simmons, Fultz, and Embiid. And then they signed Redick to give them some help. So that was a fun team. It was their first year back. So I almost will give them a pass on that. However, in hindsight, excuse me, we know what happened with Fultz. So the following year, they made the big splash with trading for Jimmy Butler, and he made almost an immediate impact. However, in that draft, they drafted Mikal Bridges and then traded him for Zaire Smith, who's not even in the league, I don't think, anymore. Still another third seed in the East, and second round loss to Toronto. So you're kind of seeing a trend here, and I think the 2019-20 season you just kind of throw out. That was, they lost in the first round. Give them an asterisk because it was COVID. However, the key to that was going into the offseason, or going into that season, the prior offseason, they chose Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler and ended up trading and got Josh Richardson out of the deal. And then their big splash was Al Horford, who was a complete and total bust for the Sixers. And I think, to me, this is a turning point in this season. I'll get into that in a little bit. But the following year, then, they drafted Tyrese Maxey, got knocked out in the second round again, this time with the first seed. They traded for, they had Seth Curry and Danny Green on that team. This was the team I felt had the best shot to win. Unfortunately, it just never went out that way, and that was the Toronto year with that was the year before with the Toronto, or a couple of years before. But this one, I mean, again, at this point, they're all running together. I forget which year this was, but either way, they were the first seed. They should have done better. And then last year, we know what happens. They brought in Harden, finally got rid of Ben Simmons, still lost in the second round. So with the process, which is what everybody kind of is thinking about, I feel as though it may be coming to an end. We might be seeing the end of the process, but where did it go wrong? And I mean, I couldn't pinpoint one specific thing, and I don't think it was a flawed game plan at all. But you go back to the Sam Hinkie days, and he was very analytical, and he took it to the next level, though, where he's willing and dealing draft picks. He had 100 second-round picks that ended up somehow turning into first picks, and drafted this guy, didn't want this guy. And it was very confusing to keep up with. I remember at the very beginning, people would put sort of flow charts that said this pick for that. And it really did get confusing. One thing I will say, and I don't know if some of this was he was a victim of where they picked in the draft, whether it was his eye for talent, but like he would pick guys and give them a year or two, and if they weren't progressing to where everybody thought they were, he got rid of them. I'm looking at like Michael Carter-Williams, Jahlil Okafor, and even like, and I do think we could have dodged a bullet. I think it was the year, it was Jabari Parker was one that he's okay. And Andrew Wiggins, who was supposed to be, everybody's like winless for Wiggins. And Wiggins he's a good player, but he's definitely not that high level superstar that everybody thought he was going to be. And the problem too with him, like he picked the draft, like he saw Embiid and picked him, so he was good with talent, I guess that way. But he wasn't a splashy guy, so I don't know if he would have went after a Jimmy Butler or JJ Redick, which at that point in the process, that's what you needed. And for say what you want about the process, it set itself up to get to those points where you could go after a Jimmy Butler, where you could be in the conversation for James Harden. There were so many times where Kevin Durant has been linked to either trade rumors or they could go after him in free agency. So he kind of wheeled and dealed and did that, but all of a sudden the NBA just didn't like how he was flaunting it in front of their faces. And he resigned, and Colangelo, his dad, took it was very shady. I feel it was an NBA inside job, and nobody's going to tell me anything wrong because it seems funny. Their first draft pick, they got the first pick, and it was supposed to be, and it was Ben Simmons, who is this franchise all once in a lifetime player. Look it up. Everybody was saying that, believe it or not. And then Brian Colangelo had the burner Twitter accounts where he's ripping Hinkie, he's ripping the players. And the whole Hinkie to Colangelo to Elton Brand process was, pardon the pun, was just a messy one because it just was it the NBA? Was it real? Like it was shady. And nobody's going to tell me that the NBA didn't look at Sam Hinkie, who was very openly tanking, and tell me any different. So, is that like the issues in the general manager, the front office? Is that where some of the issues stem from? I mean, I would think so. I mean, you missed with Fultz, and again, you don't necessarily want to say, and you've got the benefit of hindsight right here. However, I mean, you did pay a lot to get up there, and then the guy played like one game before he got hurt. But speaking of the GM, is it Doc Rivers? Is Doc Rivers the issue with the process? Now, Brett Brown was the right coach at the right time to kind of get us to this point. And I like the fact that they gave him a year or two of them being good to sort of go into the playoffs and see what he could do. But much like a lot of the shit we bitch about Doc Rivers for, Brett Brown didn't make adjustments. Brett Brown didn't do this. Brett Brown didn't do that. So bring in Doc Rivers. And again, I think he was the right coach at the right time to replace Brett Brown. He came in with this pedigree and, he's this, he's that. But at the end of the day, and I think we're experiencing this now, he is who he is. And I personally feel he's one of those guys who is living large on that title he won in Boston with the first quote-unquote super team that all the guys colluded to come together and play to win the title. I mean, to be honest, they should have won two with the talent they had. So everybody who says, he knows how to manage this and he won a championship, yeah, maybe so, but he should have won two. They should have won technically they could have won three, but I think the year in between there was injuries, but they could have beaten the Kobe's Lakers again. Or they should have, I should say. So now I think he's riding hard on that one championship that I hesitate to say it, but I think a lot of people could have won. Because look at a guy like Eric Spoelstra, who everybody said is getting the benefit of LeBron, Bosh, and Dwayne Wade in Miami. He's still there. He's still doing good shit with the Miami Heat, despite the turnover. Doc Rivers has basically, he is who he is. He won that championship because of the talent. All he does is blow leads because he doesn't adjust. You know how many times a team has blown 3-1 leads in the NBA? Very, very rare that it happens. The fact that it's happened to him 3 times is just out of this world, mind blowing. So you blow a 3-1 lead, and he always has an excuse on why he blew that 3-1 lead, but it comes down to this. You've done it 3 times, dude. And part of the big things that people always complain about is you're stubborn with your rotations and you usually don't budge. Which it's one thing when you're playing a regular season game in February, but now you're in the playoffs. You got to shorten the bench. You got to go with what's working. Go with the hot hand. He doesn't do that. And I'll go back to the effort and the prep for the team. I feel that he does not do a good job having that team ready. I mean, they've come out. This is 3 games in a row. And again, depending on when you listen to this, there is the 4th game. Hopefully he has them come out tonight against Miami better. But I don't know. And this is something that's consistent with him. And it's one thing if we're being too hard on Doc and we're taking it out. Okay, maybe we're just tough love or displacing our frustration. These are the things you've consistently done wherever you've been. Minus that 1 year in Boston when you won a championship. But you also had 3 of the top probably 5 or 6 players in the NBA at the time for that. I don't know. So is Glenn the guy that's going to lead us post-process? I don't think so. I think once the process is over, the whole thing gets blown up. I want to go back to some front office decisions. So we talked about some of the draft picks, but to me, the biggest whiff of the whole process error, and believe me, there's enough, was choosing Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler. On the same day, they signed Harris to the $180 million 5-year deal. They traded Butler to Miami. Well, they signed him and then traded him. Butler, I don't think, wanted to leave. He plays the same position as Toby, and I don't know. I'll go to my grave saying that they should have kept Butler over Harris. I mean, and Butler still gets pissed off about it. I did a stat the other day, and he's like 10-5 versus the Sixers since the trade, and he's averaging like 27 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists or something. Like, you think he's not a little pissed off? And imagine him now on this team. Maybe they still are able to go after Harden, but who knows? You got Maxey then, you got Embiid, and Embiid and Butler really got along together. So, I mean, there's that chemistry. Would he have somehow made Ben Simmons better? Because the 1 year that they played together, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't until after Jimmy Butler left and the pressure was squarely on Ben Simmons that he, whatever you want to say about him, and I don't want to rip him for mental health if he truly has it, but when Jimmy Butler was there and he was the third option, all of a sudden that team looks completely different when he's able to be the facilitator. It wasn't until after Butler left that things started getting a little crazy. And I mean, speaking of Ben Simmons, listen, we were all wrong. And there's not one person out there listening that at one point in their life, during the whole Ben Simmons saga, from the time they drafted him till the time they got rid of him, at least once, you stuck up for him, or you really thought, okay, maybe this time he's actually going to learn to shoot, and maybe he's going to be the player we would. And if you're saying, no, that wasn't me, you're lying, because I guarantee you at least once. Maybe you didn't have to do it every year like me. Maybe you didn't have to say, look at that, man, he's shooting. Maybe you shouldn't have said, maybe you were like, all right, the first time, let's trade him to Houston for Harden. I was like, no, let's kind of wait and give him a chance. I'll admit, I was wrong. I was wrong on Ben Simmons. But nobody out there, and you're a liar if you're going to go there and say that, nobody out there said, Ben Simmons sucks, we should have never drafted him. And if you did, talk to me. Show me receipts, because I don't believe you. And he ended up being who he was. And I know now everybody sees the draft reports where basically it predicted that this was going to happen. Great. We have the benefit of hindsight. But don't you dare tell me, none of you tell me that you were anti-Ben Simmons the whole time, because I'll tell you you're a liar. And even Fultz, for a split second, I was on the Fultz bandwagon. So don't even tell me you were against Fultz the whole time, because you're a liar. Because the team, at one point, Fultz was supposed to be the Tyrese Maxey that we see, but a better shooting version of him. And you know what happened? The one thing Fultz was supposed to be able to do, he comes into camp and can't do, is shoot. Sounds familiar, kind of like Ben Simmons. So some of those moves, maybe they should have traded Simmons earlier. Maybe they should have forced him. Like, they ended up being strong and firm with him well after the fact. But maybe they should have nipped that shit in the bud. Maybe they should have had Herb McGee come in and work with him. Maybe they should have said, get your brother out of here. You're a member of the Sixers. You work with our guys. I don't know. Maybe it's Brett Brown's fault. Maybe that's part of the reason why they got rid of Brett Brown. I don't know. But either way, somewhere along the line, the timing was off, and it could have been saved, but it went too far off the rails. And then I think the ultimate thing was just bad luck. And everybody's going to say, oh, Joe is injury prone, blah, 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 blah. Listen, a lot of his injuries early in his career were due to him not fully understanding and knowing how to play. A lot of those early knee and foot injuries were from him falling the wrong way, if you look back on it. And in the 17-18 season, he fractured his orbital bone going into the playoffs. That was the Phantom of the Opera when he wore the black mask and everything. That's a freak accident. Elbows happen. I mean, he took one. The next year, he had the knee tendonitis, only played 10 games down the stretch, and then he had a stomach virus in the Toronto series. And that was the 4-bounce shot with Kawhi. And that, to me, still stings. It's one of my top 5 losses. Tune into 2 weeks ago, the episode when I talk about the post-Super Bowl hangover and mourning period. This one hurts because I feel like they could have been the Raptors of that year and gone on and upset the Warriors with everything and whatnot. But again, that was with Butler, Embiid, and Simmons. And if you have to let Tobias Harris go, so be it. So be it. You keep Jimmy Butler, who's a bona fide at the time, was a bona fide superstar in the league. But again, bad luck with that. And then 1920, like I said, I don't even know what you want to say about that. It was COVID. It was the bubble. I think, sorry, Bron, but that's an asterisk. I mean, I don't count that year anyway, so I don't care. The next year, Embiid tears his meniscus in the first round, misses a couple games, but plays the entire second round. So again, you see a pattern here. Yes, he gets hurt, but he's a trooper through these injuries. And last year, of course, was the cheap shot against Toronto, which caused the concussion and the fractured orbital bone, which it took him forever to get out of the concussion protocol, which ultimately I think was what hurt them because he missed the first 2 games against the Heat. And all of a sudden now you're down 2-0 in that game against the Heat with Jimmy Butler still pissed off from being traded a couple years before. And again, you have the Fultz injury, his shoulder injury. I mean, how bad luck is that? And he has no idea. And I stopped following it, to be completely honest, once they got rid of him. So maybe they did come out with more. But I know it's like a random shoulder overuse injury that he said, I read somewhere, said because he shot so much. He felt it in training camp, but just thought it wasn't used to using it. Like that's a freak injury. You can't plan on that, especially when you could have had Jason Tatum. But you took Fultz because he was the consensus number 1 guy, and then he hurts his shoulder shooting too much. A shooter who hurts his shoulder by shooting too much. Only in Philadelphia, people. Only in Philadelphia. And yes, New Philly, this, blah, blah, blah. But stop it. Where else does something like that happen? Where else does a guy who comes out, it's going to be a shooting point guard, hurts his shoulder by shooting too much, getting ready for the season? And then I'm going to classify this one as an injury, and this is the one that it's going to piss me off forever. And it almost made it up there, but I think because it was a 4 bounce against Toronto and it would have sent it into overtime. But Ben Simmons hiding in that, basically it wasn't even game 7, hiding that whole series in the fourth quarter against the Hawks. Like, that's an issue. And again, why was he in there, Doc? Why? Like, everybody in Philadelphia, everybody nationally who's watching the game, they saw he was hiding. How could you not do that? His teammates, stop it. Why was he in there, Doc? Explain that to me. I would love to have Doc sitting here because I'm sure he would have some smart-ass, smug answer to say, like he always does. Like, well, what do you mean he was hiding? He was a decoy. Fuck you, Doc. Why was he still in there? Because you're stubborn. Because you're living off of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen. That's why. You're not a good coach, damn it. Fuck you, Doc. Anyway. All right. So, there you go. I mean, where do you want to... What went wrong in the process? I mean, was it Hinkie or getting rid of Hinkie and bringing in the Colangelos? Was it Doc Rivers replacing Brett Brown? Was it Brett Brown not being tougher on Ben Simmons? Was it just bad luck? I mean, to me, I think the thing that changed the whole course of everything was Jimmy Butler, because we all saw that Embiid was about to just step up and come into his own like he has been the past 2 or 3 years. Imagine having Jimmy Butler. Or even if you'd still got rid of Jimmy Butler, fine. Trade Ben Simmons earlier the first time. Or be stricter with Ben Simmons. Like, there's just so much bullshit that happened with this team, and it's frustrating. And as I've said 1,000 times on both podcasts, the Sixers, obviously the Eagles are my first love, my first team, the one I'm the most passionate about. But, man, the Sixers are right there for me. And to see them be this close and buy into the process. Yes, I bought 100% into the process. To be completely honest with you, I'm still not 100% out on the process. The original goal of this podcast today was going to be to bury the process. Have an obituary, have a funeral for the process. I couldn't do it because I still believe, God damn it, somehow something's going to happen. I'm like that little kid that believes wrestling is still real. Like, that's where I am. But I don't know. Was it successful? I think it depends on how you describe success. Are they fun to watch compared to where they were? They were dreadful going into the process. Absolutely dreadful. Yes, if that's the case, they're look, the dog's even upset now because I'm screaming. For the love of God. But if that's what you determine is successful, then yeah, they're fun to watch. They're back like in Iverson days. They're must-see TV. Like, I always watch them now. If it's to win a championship, I don't know. I don't know. Tell me what you think. Was the process successful? And ultimately, what was the purpose of the process? To me, the Sixers they're a little bit better than the purgatory where they're 7-8 seed or low lottery. But here we are. What do you think? What doomed the process? And again, I'm still holding out hope because I see glimmers. By the time you're listening to this, they could be completely out of it, and I could be off the process bandwagon. But for now, I'm still on. Tell me what you think. The dog's upset. Pandemonium is breaking out here in my house. What is going on? But no Back to the Future next week, so use that time to catch up. I'll be in Mexico. However, if you're a This Day in Philly Sports History listener, and you should be, please, we'll still be sure to check us out next week in Mexico. It's Women's History Month, and we've been doing spotlighting famous and influential women in Philadelphia all month for March. Check us out on YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter at Jimbo_Mott. Instagram at Philly Jimbo. Be sure to like and subscribe the podcast or the video. Until next time, trust the process, and I'll see you when I see you.